Deltarune Chapter 5 is out right now. And just recently, we put out our Frozen Fate theory, hoping to get ahead of the curve on any crazy reveals about Carol and the weirdroute. But what we got was surprising, to say the least. Originally, as we said in the last video, which you should watch because we're going to keep talking about it a lot, and you should just go watch it now. In our last video, we said we were going to make a sequel about Carol and Gaster and how they are likely working together. And we did get some evidence for that in Chapter 5, but we also got more evidence of something totally different about the weirdroute that we didn't talk about. So instead of making Frozen Fate Part 2 just yet, we're going to turn the cassette around to Frozen Fate B-side. I'm Dawn, and I'm joined by Dan. And we are Danger After Dawn. Today, we're going to be talking about parallels and the relationship between December and Noelle Holiday. So strap in.
Chapter 5's weirdroute was shockingly short. At least the parts of the route that doesn't involve going off path for access to the Twisted Sword ride later on. This weirdroute involves frankly completely broken Noelle. She becomes unhappy with her simple, boring life. Now seeking change, she is fully aware that Kris has managed to become an entirely new person basically overnight. And now she wants to do something crazy. In her words, she wants to go somewhere no one has ever been before. Which leads to her and Kris entering the lake, going further and further until the game can't take it anymore. They basically go out of bounds and end up in Chapter 7, completely skipping 6, going straight to 7 B-side. The fuck is happening?
This may be hard to parse at first. After all, we don't really know what's going on with the lake, even though it does seem to be significant. So all the way back in the earliest days of Deltarune, Onion-san was seeking out a familiar song coming from the bottom of the lake that we have called the Song of the Deep. Susie hears the same song in Chapter 4 and says it's coming from the other side of the lake, which, you know, we go across the lake in the other route, so that's interesting. Our best understanding for what's going on here is toilet theory. I'm sure everyone knows it by now. If you don't, I'll put it on the screen and you can go watch the video. The theory is basically that the sewers below hometown house a massive dark world that can only be accessed by the shelter. However, sewers usually connect to natural bodies of water, so the runoff water from these sewers runs deep into the lake. Therefore, entering the deepest parts of this lake would lead to the deepest dark world we have ever seen. And at this point, this theory is basically true. We have Flowery, who straight up says a big dark world is under hometown, and we have this whole weirdroute thing where they're diving into the water and they're entering this weird CRT dimension or whatever. If we want to solve all of this nonsense, we need to look back on some repeated phrases and visual elements throughout Deltarune to make some connections, figure out what's this trying to say.
One thing that's worth pointing out is that Noelle's desire to seek out something new is not, a new thing. This was first mentioned way back in Chapter 2, during the segment where her and Kris are walking together. She says that she's always wanted to do something like this, and that December said she'd take her. In this dialogue, though, she's specifically talking about how Des wanted to take her somewhere like the Cyber City Dark World. We could take this in a lot of different directions, but it's interesting that a quote-unquote new place happens to be a Dark World here. In Chapter 5's weirdroute, Noelle is finally taking it upon herself to make that happen. Even if you tell her to stop, She won't. She only falls back into her complacent attitude if you don't do anything once her and Kris are too far into the lake to make it without your input.
Despite the fact that we don't know much about December, it should be more than obvious from what little we do know that she is rebellious and adventurous, based on how she's talked about by Noelle at least. Noelle idolized this girl, but right before she starts talking about her stagnant life, she says something incredibly interesting that maybe I'm reading into a little too much, but I feel like it's an interesting choice of words. She says, "Since Des left." Now you can call me crazy. Comment down below and like and subscribe while you're down there. But this is a weird word to use here, right? Not since Des disappeared, not since Des went missing, but since Des left. As in, wherever she is, whoever she got there was voluntary, at least in Noelle's eyes. Which I don't think is an opinion she'd have outside of the weirdroute. Because outside the weirdroute, she kind of doesn't even acknowledge this verbally, really. Like, sure, Noelle has always wanted to leave her old life behind. She said as much in Chapter 2's normal route a couple times. And she even nearly says the same line word for word in Chapter 5's weird route. But now that she's actually been shown what's out of reach through the player, I feel like she's realized wherever Des went was somewhat intentional. Noelle, as we said before, is trying to go out of bounds. And we know from various spams and sweepstake posts and some of her dialogue with Susie that she's always trying to break the bounds of the games she plays. Using the lake, she wants to achieve the same sensation in her real life, because Des did it too. It's not like Noelle chose to do this lake thing on a whim. She says her and the others as kids always wanted to see what was out there. And earlier in the day, she almost gave like hundreds of dollars to Susie, which is not a good sign. Likely because she knew she wasn't coming back after her meeting with Kris.
Everyone is always talking about that lost where the forest would grow dialogue. But if we really focus on the meaning behind those 6 words, doesn't that sound like boundary breaking? The forest quite literally is the bounds of hometown. To get lost out there, being unable to return, would mean going out of bounds. We even do this in the mantle minigame, cutting the trees to progress. And we see a black monster that follows Kris's movements in a strange room. If you change the state of a variable in the code named Toriel, this sprite turns into a black deer. And if you overlay the routes map with hometowns, that area is right above the lake. The last area open to the outside, the easiest method to go out of bounds. If we're right here, then part of the weirdroute's purpose might be to make Noelle just like December. To give her the confidence, the boldness, and power to stop just doing Noelle things. Noelle will be able to grab DELTARUNE itself by its strings and change it in a way no one else can. Not even the Whirring Knight, the image of her very sister.
This out of bounds parallel is far from the only connection between these two's path into darkness. Thanks to Asgore, we got some details involving a dark world from many years ago created by the Roaring Knight, in which something terrible happened. This terrible thing is shown by a big red screen with the big weirdroute stab sound effect. So, some people say the situation is about the disappearance of Des, but I doubt it. Someone was hurt here, and we know there was a struggle because of the Black Shard's appearance there. We also know that Asgore wasn't the one that fought the knight, as Rouse claims Asgore's write-up on the incident says it was left at the original scene. So Asgore arrived at the crime scene after the crime had been committed. Going back to chapter 4, Asgore starts his whole monologue about the Black Shard by saying, "We're almost there, aren't we, old friend?"
That doesn't sound like something I'd say about someone who's alive.
Nor a younger person like December.
But it sounds like something you might say to someone who needs to be avenged.
And one of the only people we know who has died due to an unknown cause is Gerson. The knight killed Gerson in a dark world. So let's talk about that.
The most notable thing about Gerson is that he's alive in Undertale, but dead in Deltarune. Now this is also true of Rudy, but Rudy dies of old age in the Undertale world according to alarm clock dialogue. Not an illness where he's still around middle age. Gerson is old in Undertale, but we only ever see him in a slightly younger state in Deltarune as a Darkener. It's stated that Gerson only died a few years ago, which is obviously odd, as it's clearly been a very long time since that Dark Fountain was made. But I think we can solve this easily.
In Chapter 2's Weirdroute, we kill Birdly in the Dark World. I don't think that's ambiguous. I mean, we literally use something called Snow Grave on him. And, everyone at the time thought we killed him. But then we learned in Chapter 4 that Birdly is just having a nice little nap. He's just unconscious. Oh, he's okay. But merely unconscious is probably underselling it. I highly doubt Birdly is actually going to recover from what happened, because how did the doctors even treat a snow grave? How do you do that? If we think back to the Gerson situation, we can kind of use this to paint a clearer picture. Asgore says that though he blamed himself, no one blamed him for what happened. If people inexplicably saw Asgore with Gerson's dead body, I think they probably would hate him and be angry, but no one's mad at him, really. At worst, he was suspiciously fired for failing to properly handle a sensitive situation that honestly probably only evil ass Carol understands, because he probably doesn't want Asgore digging into dark worlds by entering them and messing up whatever garbage she's up to. So Gerson was probably only injured to everyone else, and despite it being a fatal attack in the dark world, it probably just looked like he was unconscious like Birdly. And then after some time passed, he ended up passing away. And after all that time, Asgore's still digging in to solve this case. And I think this works as a pretty solid parallel to, Birdly. Both Noelle and Des, as the Knight, take down a Lightner as part of their descent into true darkness. Honestly, maybe it wasn't even the Knight. It could have just, Asgore never saw them. It could have just been Des just living in darkness, a lot like Susie is doing right now. But let's not go that far. That's all. We don't got enough stuff for that.
And if that's not too convincing, look at the song that plays during that weirdroute Birdly fight. It is literally a slowed down version of Raise Up Your Bats bassline. On top of that, it's called D.OGG. This pivotal moment in the weirdroute is its single most important scene. It's telling us to think about December while it's happening. That's going to be more clear proof that the weirdroute, at the very least, partially involved making Noelle another Des.
To shift topics a little bit, Kris's whole role in this whole dilemma is also quite interesting. It's strongly implied that a young Kris was around for that Asgore's bad day. We can tell based on Asgore's choice of words, as well as Asgore already knowing that Kris is necessary to seal the fountains. Kris also has some pretty curious bodily issues in Chapter 5. It's obvious that Kris is much weaker without their soul, but at the start of Chapter 5, we literally see their skin graying as they struggle to get inside and shove their soul back in their body. So I think Kris is like, I think it's kind of obvious Kris was dying, but in case you were wondering, yes, Kris cannot live without the soul. That is not ambiguous. So Kris is definitely necessary for the weirdroute, and we said that as much in our original Frozen Fate video. And Kris straight up drowns in Chapter 5. So if we're going with this whole Noelle and Des parallel thing, Kris probably died during whatever happened to Des too, right? I mean, explain a lot. Like, why it's been implied they had a soul that didn't involve us prior to this, and why they've seemingly been practicing soul ripping with pillows as a child. It's certainly possible that Kris's original soul is with the knight in some way. Like, maybe it's the eyeball in their chest, and that used to be said soul. It's hard to say, and it's harder to say what Noelle will do that's so different from December. And maybe it's our involvement that is the key to giving her unlimited power as opposed to getting her loss, like Des. But that's, we don't have enough for that.
We also aren't sure about Carol's involvement in certain aspects of the weirdroute. We're confident in the Thorn Ring and Chapter 2's fountain being her idea, but stuff like the fork in the road between Chapter 7's Side B and the Twisted Sword route raises a lot of questions. We're not really sure if she's in charge of both of them. If we had to guess, she's probably only trying to set up the Side B path. But there was basically no Carol content in this chapter. The best we got is Rudy saying she's investigating near the shelter during the festival, which honestly probably just means that she's, plotting her evil plan bullshit again. We also aren't sure what Kris did that exhausted them so heavily between Chapter 4 and 5. Strangely, they don't do it during the weirdroute, so I guess whatever it is might not be known until Chapter 6. Which could pretty heavily impact our thoughts on all of the big evil plan stuff. And speaking of that, we really need to discuss the contents of Carol's conspiracy board. Now, we haven't actually seen it, but maybe we can make an educated guess about what's about it and what we can piece together here.
It's still very interesting that Asgore has a whole monologue right next to that board and in front of one of Carol's katanas. Like, what is it about those two things that sets him off? Like, the katana is definitely not the same sword that's being used by the knight, because unless the knight is Carol, that doesn't really work. Like, they really gotta go pick it up every now and that seems kind of inconvenient. We do have a picture in December's room that has a very similar sword. So it's possible that, like, we already know Carol has multiple katanas, so maybe Des took one. So she has one that's similar, and that's where Asgore is making this connection. Now, a major question about this is, if she's working with the knight through Kris, why would she even have a conspiracy board about, the only thing it can be about Des? I mean, honestly, even having a conspiracy board about how to return her to normal would be insane. Like, what the fuck, would Asgore not be godsmacked at that? Yeah, now you just learned who the Roaring Knight is. Oh wow, now you know how to turn her back or whatever. Like, that definitely can't be what's on that. And, so there's no way the knight is on it at all. Unless Carol really just does not give a shit about what Asgore does, because he's just gonna die. And she's gonna sick his own kid on him like a wild dog. So what if the board is about the Des conspiracy and what happened to her, which I guess is like the most obvious answer. So she could set up the same circumstances for Noelle. If you haven't watched the first Frozen Fate video, I don't know why you're this far into this one and haven't. I already linked it at the start of the video. You can go watch it. It's fine. Just come back to this one. We said that the weirdroute is Plan B for the Night Gang, which interesting that they called Chapter 7 Side B. Don't think I didn't notice that. I mean, Dan noticed it, but
I noticed it. Yeah, I put it out.
Thank you. I didn't even realize my writing was so good. I didn't know I predicted it. But it all depends on what the player does, whether or not this plan goes through or not. So, they're not relying on plan B. It's all about if we do it. So I wouldn't be shocked if it's the part of the plan that required the most work for Carol to set up. Because everything else that they do, that the Night King is doing, is just stated in the church dark world. But for the weirdroute, like, the only way you can get information on like how it's done and where you do it, you have to like decipher cryptic visuals from a haunted video game that's under Astral's bed, that's also in a dark world. Like, the prophecy is literally publicly available information. Like, it's vague, but that is publicly available information in the form of religious text. And yet the weirdroute isn't really referenced at all in the novel route, and isn't really talked about as part of the prophecy, really. Like, it is prophesized, but it doesn't seem like it's something that like the people who practice this religion know. And even though Rouse is aware of both, he is actually shocked to learn that the night existed before Deltarune, and questions why he wouldn't know that, because it should be important. And I think this pretty much confirms that whatever happened with Des and whatever crazy planning is happening is outside of the bounds of like Deltarune, the game, inside of the canon of Deltarune. Like, this is not within the bounds of the story, and that's why Rouse doesn't know what's going on. So while it's a bit of a leap, I honestly think that considering the nuances of the crumbs of information we've gotten, the board being comprised of weirdroute planning is honestly a pretty good answer. So just some food for thought.
With all that out of the way, I think we pretty much covered everything we wanted to do for this installment of the Frozen Fate series. TLDR, a major aspect of the weirdroute is taking Noelle down to the path of December, with the exception that Noelle will gain the power to shape her own ending for Deltarune, where December got lost. We're still working hard on the real part 2, as well as a couple of other theories, so stick around, like and subscribe and all that. See y'all later.